Hi friends, I'm here with an update on my slow stitching quilt in double gauze. I'm going to show where I'm at this point, and also I want to answer some questions that have come up. And I'm also taking this quilt, I'm putting it on a bed and laying it out in a bright room to show all the stitching so far. So let's dive right in and take a look at this quilt spread out flat. It's very free form. It's not symmetrical. There's many arc shapes, rainbow shapes that I've stitched all over the quilt. I'm using all the colors, having a lot of fun with it. And if you look really closely, you'll see that my spacing is not the same. My stitches are not perfect, and that's totally fine with me. I'm just having fun quilting this beautiful soft double gauze, adding lots of color, working my way through. One of the questions that came up was about how I'm approaching quilting this project and how I'm getting my lines straight. Well, first of all, I want to say they're not straight, but I did get myself started with my initial lines. And I'm going to show you my approach now. So my initial plan involved the two outside lines of the biggest arc going towards the middle, and then two of the same on the other side. So 3 arcs in total. And this was to get me started and to get some stitching in the middle to hold everything together. So I used the painter's tape to mark out these lines. So each line here had a piece of tape. And I knew that I wanted to connect them with the arc shape. And I didn't use tape for those. I just freeform made an arc shape. And you can see even with drawing, it's very hard to do a perfect shape. And I wasn't concerned with that. I knew that having the straight lines for these main 3 arcs would give me a really good jumping off point to then make some smaller arcs in the other areas that didn't have stitching. So after I'd done several lines of these first 3 big arcs, I then went and made other ones in the other areas. And of course, as I made these initial 3 arcs, I didn't just do the initial line, I did a couple of lines before I moved on to the other areas. So I did my first line, and then I started moving inwards with these big arcs. But after the initial taping of those 3 arcs, I didn't use any other mark making tools. I just decided that I'm not going to worry about perfection. I'm just going to enjoy the process of making these arcs, stitching freeform, and filling all the areas with stitching. So the tape was only on the quilt while I stitched those initial lines, and then I removed them and there was no more tape, just stitching. So this is my initial arc that came almost to the center. So there was a piece of tape here and another one on the other side. I began stitching all the way up to here, and then I free-formed this arc. There was another piece of tape here, so I could stitch straight back down to the bottom. Then I removed the tape, and I came back, started over here, and stitched this next line, and then the red line, and I did the same on the other side where I had 2 arcs. I thought I would also show how I'm stitching. So I'm working on this small little rainbow shape here, measuring out the amount of thread that I'm going to need, and adding enough extra so that my needle stays threaded. And there's two ways that I find really helpful to stitch. So this first way relies on having your piece flat, if that's practical to have it flat, and underneath there's a self-healing cutting mat, so I'm not worried about scratching the table underneath. And I'm taking my needle and I'm digging it in till I can feel that mat underneath, so I know I've gone through all the layers, and I take a stitch. The other way is the way that I use for most of the stitching, and that is to take my hand and to grab underneath, holding ahead of where I'm stitching. It's creating some tension. I'm able to grab exactly where I want to stitch. I can still follow the line that's already there and stitch, and I just continually adjust my underneath grip using my right hand to keep pushing that fabric in so that I have a nice grip and there's some tension. So this stitch can be used anywhere on the quilt. I'm on the edge here, but this works really well in the middle. And you can see here that I'm taking 2 stitches at once. I take 1 or 2 stitches. That's just what's comfortable for me. There are longer needles that you can use for slow stitching where you can stack up many more stitches at once. And that's an option as well. I like taking 1, maximum 2 stitches at a time. I feel like I have more control over what's happening with everything. So I just continue to rotate the quilt as needed, adjust my hand position, and I continue to stitch all the way down to the other side. When I get to the end of this row, I push my needle through to the other side, and I flip my quilt over, and I make a very tiny knot. And then I take my thread in just that top layer, I pull the knot through, then I take my needle back and forth a few times, just in that top layer there, and some of the batting to bury it, and then I snip it off. So it's barely visible, and I feel like it's really secure that way. So here's what it looks like on the gray side. Here's what it looks like on the navy blue side. There's another arc. It's not perfect, and that's okay. You'd only see that my lines aren't perfectly straight, the stitches aren't the same size if you looked really, really closely. The imperfections are okay with me. So this is where I am at this point. There's still lots of more stitching to do. The design is very freeform, and I'm really enjoying the process. And I think it's looking really great. My initial idea I had about piecing together these small pieces of floral fabric I had for the binding, I'm starting to move away from. I'm looking at the piece and the bold lines and the solid colors, and I'm thinking I probably am going to want a solid color for the binding, but I'm still undecided. So let me know what you think. If you have any ideas or comments about where it's at this point, let me know. All the comments last time I really appreciated. It was really encouraging, and I love to hear from you. So that's where I'm at so far. Still more to go. Many hours of enjoyable stitching. Until next time, happy stitching.